Father Nation.com. Father Nation.com.
Jesse Foster welcomes you to Father Nation, where other dads illuminate your path to become a better father. Prepare to enter into the man cave.
This is Jesse Foster, host of a syndicated show, Father Nation, where I spotlight the wonderful contributions of guidance, understanding, and love from dads all over the world. Father Nation now features professional dads who, through their outstanding business involvements, help to elevate fatherhood. Father Nation is made possible, in part, by Al Cole from CBS Radio and his nationally syndicated show, People of Distinction. This upcoming June, look for the People of Distinction Humanitarian Awards in New York City, hosted by Al Cole. And the Father Nation is now broadcast over the iTunes radio network, along with the Live 365 network. The Father Nation show is where we interview dads about their experiences as a dad so that they can share their wisdom and experiences with you. Let their journey illuminate your path, listen to their failures and successes, and you can look to avoid their mistakes and emulate their successful strategies. Take action to be a better dad. Today on the show, I'm excited to have Drew Pittman. He's the author of a book, First Team Dad, Your Playbook for a Winning Family. He's also an NFL agent. Among his clients, Jared Cook of the St. Louis Rams, or perhaps the soon-to-be Los Angeles Rams again. Drew Pittman comes from Texas, and he's a father of two boys, aged 13 and 15, so he's got a couple of teenage boys in the house. And one of his mottos is, good isn't good enough. And as time goes fast, you have to be great in the time given. Drew, thanks so much for coming on Father Nation. And as we begin this episode, let's just hear a little more about your background, maybe kind of what made you to be the man you are today and how you came about writing the First Team Dad book.
Hey, Jesse, thanks a lot for having me on. It's awesome to be here, and what you're doing with Father Nation is really great, and I commend you for it and thank you for it. I know we need resources as dads and husbands, and this is a great resource for guys everywhere, and so thank you. I guess to start with, I had a great dad. My mom and dad did divorce when I was about 8 years old, and my mom remarried about a year later, and so I've had a great stepdad for over 40 years. And so I really feel like I've had kind of the best of both worlds with two really awesome men who have been a really great influence in my life. And then I think also sports has been a big part of shaping who I am. And I played soccer at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and have always been very involved in sports. And of course, now sports is my livelihood as well, and has been for the last 24 years. And then more than anything, just my relationship with Jesus Christ has shaped me more than anything. And so I'm very thankful for the life that I'm having, and thankful for my wife and my kids, and that's really how I got to where I am right now.
And being an NFL agent, your life, as far as business at least, kind of revolves around football, even today. And your book, First Team Dad, Your Playbook for a Winning Family, it seems like a theme there is kind of relating fatherhood to, well, football. Many dads like football. I myself love football. I'm a big Denver Broncos fan. I think you said you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. And you said an interesting story there at the beginning of the book I liked about your father-in-law, actually, the former head coach at Baylor University. And I want you to just retell the worm story to start out.
Awesome. Yeah, my father-in-law is Grant Taff. He was the head football coach at Baylor University for 22 years. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He currently runs the American Football Coaches Association and has done that for the last 20-plus years, and has really shaped the game a lot throughout his life. But what happened was, before I actually met my wife, I grew up in Texas, and Southwest Conference was the big conference there. And of course, I was in Dallas and had gone to Southern Methodist, and so we were in the same conference as Baylor and So I had been able to watch Coach Taft throughout the years, growing up and watching Baylor, and always wondering how this tiny little Christian school in Waco, Texas, could compete with the likes of the University of Texas and Texas A&M and Arkansas and Texas Tech. And so I always had a lot of admiration for what he had been able to do. But on this one afternoon in I believe it was 1992, 91 maybe. I was sick in bed. I was watching football, and the Sun Bowl comes on, and it's Coach Taft coaching his last game, and he's coaching against the University of Arizona, and they had this vaunted Desert Swarm defense, as it was called, and the Baylor Bears were the underdogs and were not expected to win. And as the final seconds tick off the clock, Coach Taft pulls off an upset in his very last game. And Dick Tomey, who was the coach for Arizona, later said that he had no chance in that game because there was no way God was going to let Coach Taft lose his last game. But it was a well-coached game, and it was really awesome. And the thing that made the biggest impact on me was, as I was laying there, of course, I had never met Coach Taft. I'd never met his youngest daughter, Lane, who later became my wife. I saw this man be lifted up on his players' shoulders, and they wanted to carry him off the field in victory in his last game. And he motioned to the players to let him down, and they let him down. And he walked over to the sidelines where his wife, Donnell, and his 3 daughters were standing, and he takes them by the hand and puts his arm around his daughters, and they walk off as a family. And I thought, wow, that's what it's all about. Here's a guy who, could be carried off the field in victory, and yet he chose to leave the game as he entered the game, which was a family man and with his family, and it made a huge impact on me. Like I said, I had an awesome dad. I had a great stepdad. For a step family, I had really kind of the best that you can have. But I see a guy who's in the public spotlight, and him making that declaration of family really hit home to me. And of course, as the story goes, a couple of years later, I meet Lane, and within I think it was within 30 days, we ended up becoming engaged and getting married a year later, and kind of the rest is history.
And when you think about being a football coach, whether it's at an NFL level or at a college level or any level really, being a football coach, I think, has a lot of parallels to being a dad. What do you think some of those are?
It absolutely does. And I think the main thing about whether you're a football coach, whether you're running a business, whether you're in government, really whatever you are doing, it's all about leadership. And the great football coaches are great leaders. And I think if as dads we can emulate that, then it gives us a leg up, because a lot of men, and I speak to a lot of men all over the country, and I run the men's ministry at my church, and a lot of guys, they'll look at me and they'll go, "Oh, Drew, you're just a natural leader." And I'm just really not a leader. But the thing about it is, God designed all of us men to be leaders. It wasn't like, well, there's going to be some of you who are going to be leaders and some of you who don't ever have to lead. We're all leading something or somebody. And so the thing I always encourage men to do is to accept and embrace your role as a leader, and realize that you've been given everything that you need to be a great leader. Now, to some, it comes very easy. To others, it's not so easy. But just because something's not easy doesn't mean that you don't do it. I know as you started this podcast, you had this idea. It was a great idea. And you weren't a natural born podcast leader. You studied and you figured out what the great podcast hosts do. And so we all have to do that. And I think if, as men, we find the leaders that we think are good leaders, and if we can emulate them, then it's going to help you out. And for me, and for a lot of guys, because most guys are sports fans, if we can emulate great coaches, then it can help us out. And there's a lot of coaches that aren't great coaches, and they aren't great leaders, and they lead by intimidation, or they lead in the wrong way. So we have to be careful. But I think there's plenty of great coaches out there, and quite frankly, I think what I've done is I've taken what I feel like are the good traits from a lot of different people and a lot of different coaches, and then some of the traits maybe that I don't appreciate about them as leaders, I don't emulate those.
Yeah, exactly. I think you talked about in the book the differences between a guy like Tony Dungy and maybe a Bill Parcells. They're both successful head coaches in the National Football League, but they both had different styles. And as far as dads go, I think there could be a lot of different kinds of dads that can take different strategies when it comes to fatherhood. It doesn't all have to look the same, but I think the key is to pick out what works for you, emulate that, and find what's successful for your kids, because every kid's different as well.
Absolutely, and one of the things that it was actually at one point a chapter that ended up getting cut out of the book, but it was know your leadership style, because everybody does have a leadership style. And I think whether it be Bill Parcells or Bill Belichick or Jimmy Johnson, for example, those guys have much different leadership styles than a Tony Dungy or a Grant Taft or a Tom Landry. It doesn't mean that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just, you have to understand who you are. You have to understand what your style is, but also you have to understand what about your style really isn't effective and really isn't beneficial for your wife and your kids, and then make changes. And I think those are things that are easy to do, but it involves putting some effort into it. And kind of another theme of my book and really my life is you have to be intentional. And I think too often we kind of float through life because, like I say, life moves fast. I kind of have this saying that things move at the speed of life, and so if you blink, you're going to miss something. And so we just have to be intentional about what we're doing, how we're doing it, what works, what's effective, and what's gonna help my wife and my kids down the line, and make changes. And when you make mistakes, man, you gotta admit your mistakes, and you gotta tell your family you're sorry sometimes. And that's, I think, showing that vulnerability is a huge plus to our wife and kids.
Yeah, when you talk there about intentionality, that kind of goes along with building a culture. And whether it's Tony Dungy building his culture or Bill Parcells building his culture, they're unique cultures. But the fact is they're both intentional, and your culture is what you value. It's kind of like your game plan is your game plan is how you establish that culture. So when you think about a guy like Nick Saban in Alabama, he really brings in a specific culture to that program, and it's based upon what Nick Saban maybe values, and he makes a game plan to, make that culture into a reality day in and day out.
No question. And, the second chapter in my book is called Create a Culture, and I tell the story of Nick Saban and how I heard him speak at the American Football Coaches Association convention one year, and it really impacted me because as I heard him talk about, he had only been there 3 years and had gone from taking a school that was just a nationally renowned program that had gone really in the tank, and he took it, and in 3 years he won the national championship. And of course he's had a ton of success since then. But he talked about those things that you mentioned, what's important to him, and what he thinks is important to have success. And on his website, CoachSaban.net, he talks about what his culture is and the things that he values. And I think what hit me as I sat there and listened to him was, we all have a culture in our home. Every home has a culture. The question is it intentional? Is it a culture of chaos, or is it a culture of pressure and intensity and poor communication, or is it a culture of teamwork and a culture of communicating well with your family? And that's one of the things that we work on a daily basis in our home. And it's easy to get upset and raise your voice, whether it be a parent to a kid, or my boys one to the other, or me to one of my kids, or the kids back to us. But the important thing is that we go, hey, that's not how we're going to communicate with each other. You're upset. That's fine. I want to hear what's making you upset, and let's talk about it. And I'm telling you, I think it will constantly be a work in progress, but that's okay, as long as we are being intentional and working towards those things that really are important and that are going to make us, quote unquote, successful in our home. And I love the fact that you tied, the game plan to the culture, because one of the other chapters in the book is called, create a game plan. And if you don't have or construct a game plan, if you don't have a game plan, then you'll never accomplish that culture. And so the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I kind of see the culture as kind of the big picture, where you want your family to go, as everyone has a dream or a goal. But the game plan is more of a day-to-day, minute details. So if you're talking about things like, maybe different ideals like respect or responsibilities or consequences, or maybe even things like hygiene, you can have a game plan for each specific thing in your household that can all be kind of related to the culture as a kind of umbrella over all that game plan.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things about the book, because I like to read, and I like to learn about things that I think can help me become better and can help my family become better, help me be a better businessman, a better partner, a better agent, whatever it is. But a lot of times I read stuff and I get through with it and I go, wow, that is a lot of great information. But I have no idea how to actually apply what I just read into my life. And so what I did, and again, and we can go into it later, but I didn't really set out to write a book. I just was trying to do things to become better myself. And so one of the things that I did as I was writing for myself was I said, okay, here's a principle that I think would really apply to me as a leader of a family, but how do I make it happen? And so I would write down some things on how to actually take this principle and make it happen. And so in the book, at the end of every chapter, it's called the game plan. And it's 3 or 4 bullet points on how to actually implement the principle that you just read about into your home. So it makes it very simple. And for example, on create a game or create a culture, one of the things that I realized is if I was going to be able to implement this culture in my home, I had to do what Coach Saban did. He had to get buy-in from his players. Well, to get buy-in from my players, who is my wife and my kids, I had to allow them to be a part of the process of creating defining what our culture is going to be. And so my wife and I talked about it, and then we kind of came up with 4 things that were going to be like the 4 cornerstones of our foundation of this culture. And then we took a walk. We live kind of out in the country, and we took a walk with our boys, and beautiful day. And I asked the question. I said, hey guys, if we moved away from Salado, and a year from now, our friends were getting together and having a cookout and hanging out like we like to do, and somebody said, hey, you guys remember the Pittmans? What would they say about us? And of course, my youngest said, oh, they'd say I was the best athlete. And my oldest said, oh, they'd say I was the smartest. And then I asked a question. I said, what would we want them to say about us? Well, my youngest said, well, we'd want them to know that we love Jesus. And I go, perfect. That was number one anyway. And then we kind of led them through the other things. And it was really cool because now that culture has become like a roadmap. And anytime somebody does something that doesn't match up with our culture, then we can go, hey, is that the way we do things around here? And they go, no, And so it's really cool, and it provides an added level of accountability, which is awesome.
And you're listening to Father Nation right now with Jesse Foster. And on the line, we've got Drew Pittman, NFL agent and author of First Team Dad, Your Playbook for a Winning Family. I like how in the book, Drew, you talk about always tying these football principles into family life. So, for example, offensive line principles, how an offensive line, the key oftentimes is staying together as a unit. But like an offensive line, so it is in a family. And as a dad, you have to try and keep together a unit.
Yes, and chapter 8 is called Stay in Step, and I tell the story about the offensive line and what an offensive line has to do, and how they're it's different from a lot of other units on a football team, but they go to dinner together once a night. Most teams, you'll find that the offensive line will go to dinner together at least one night a week during the season. They, in their meeting rooms, they talk about it's almost like they create a different language that they can speak, and it's called making calls, so that when they're on the line of scrimmage, and of course the defense is shifting, and they're trying to keep the offense guessing on what they're going to do. Are they going to blitz? Are they going to zone blitz? Are they running cover 2? Are they running man? Or what are they doing? And so they're shifting all the time. Well, as they shift, the offensive linemen are speaking a language that only they know. And so when the ball is snapped, it's almost like they're dancers. They just move in as one. And it's really cool to watch. I laugh all the time because people even people in the business, they talk about the skill positions, and when they say that, they're talking about the receivers and the running backs and the quarterbacks. But I'm telling you, there is no position more skilled than the offensive lineman, because these are 6'5", 350-pound dudes that are moving as one unit. They're moving in concert. They know exactly what the other one's going to do. And if you'll just focus on the offensive line for a whole game, you'd be amazed at what they can do.
Drew, let's turn the corner here a little bit and talk about you as a dad. And as an NFL agent, you've been an NFL agent now for about 24 years. How has being an NFL agent helped you into being a better dad?
Well, there's several things, and one being, when I got into this, I started my own company, and so I have flexibility that a lot of guys don't have, and so from that standpoint, it's really helped me to be able to adjust my schedule. And I don't know if I'd have been any more successful or not, but my goal was not to take over the world of the NFL. There's several agents out there that's what they're trying to do, but my goal was to be able to help young men accomplish their goals and dreams, these players, and then to be able to have the time to sow into my kids' lives and to be the husband that Lane needed me to be. And so that's one area. A second area is I get an inside look at a bunch of different leadership styles, from owners to front offices to coaches, and I have exposure to all these things that ended up being 30 principles in this book that have allowed me to really understand how I can take those principles and use them in my own life. If I was not an NFL agent, then I wouldn't have that kind of access, and I wouldn't be able to see that those principles up close like I do. And so I think that's the main way.
And then your boys are, again, age 13 and 15. And is there any struggles today as far as raising teenage boys, or is everything pretty peachy?
No, man, it's all easy. Just kidding. I think if there's somebody that isn't dealing with struggles, I'd like to meet him, because I think we all do. I mean, life is gonna throw you curveballs, and I'll give you an example. 3.5 weeks ago, my boys were outside playing pickup. They were just playing basketball against each other one-on-one. My wife and we'd fed them earlier, and then we were sitting down to dinner, and my oldest son runs in. He said, "I tackled Eli, and I hurt him really bad, and he can't walk, and I don't know." And he was freaking out. And so it's 8 o'clock at night. We go outside, and our youngest son is laying on the ground, just hysterical. I can't move. We don't know what's going on. So we get him to wiggle his toes and move his hands, and we realize that he's not paralyzed. And our oldest son was telling us that they were, things had gotten kind of chippy, and he ended up tackling him, basically. And so we don't know how bad he's hurt. He can't straighten his leg out. His left leg is up, and he can't move it. Well, a friend of ours is a paramedic. He lives in the neighborhood. I call him. He comes over. He goes, "Man, I don't know what it is, but we better get him to the hospital." So we loaded him up in the car. Terribly painful. Every little bump we hit in the road. And like I said, we live in the country, and it was about a 25-minute drive to the hospital. We get to the hospital. They get in there, and come to find out, his hip is dislocated. Okay, so we have this big issue of, number one, our son is hurt. He ends up having to have surgery. It's a 6-week healing process. But, then there's the issue of having to explain to the youngest that he has to forgive his brother. And we explained to the oldest that, he's not a terrible person because he lost his temper. But to understand the significance of and the consequences of our actions. And so it's, in the long run, it's been a really awesome experience for everybody to learn from, but it's been just a really big hardship, and it's been expensive, and it's just it's been a struggle. And so that's just one thing in there's many.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the idea of a coach, and that team unity requires a leader. And as a dad, if you have siblings that are fighting, it's kind of up to you also to get them back on the same page.
Absolutely. And it's there's probably a number of different situations that probably, as people listen to this, they'll go, "Oh, that reminds me of in my family when such and such happened." And I had a sister, and so she was really sweet and she was really awesome, and I never had that type of situation. But there are families all over the place that guys are going to listen to this, Jesse, and they're going to go, that reminds me of this situation. And just everything that we're faced with gives us, as men, as dads, as husbands, the opportunity to lead well. Because I could have lost my temper at my oldest son, and I told my wife, because he's old enough, we were able to leave him at home while we took my youngest to the emergency room. But I told my wife while we were sitting in the hospital, I go, "I'm really struggling with being really angry at Jake." And she said, "I know." And I said, I know that I have to forgive him, just like Eli has to forgive him, and just like you have to forgive him. And so, when I came home later that night, and I woke Jacob, and I said, "Hey, buddy, I just want you to know I love you, and I forgive you, and this is something you get to learn from, and it's going to take some effort on your part, and you're going to have patience with your brother, because he may not forgive you right away, but he will forgive you." And so it was just a great opportunity for me to have to grow as well. And I think so often, because we're not trained well, that we kind of get off the rails. And one of the stories I tell in the book, in the chapter about behavior responsibility, it's called "Act Right" or "Do the Right Thing because it's the right thing to do," is a very similar story. How things escalate, and I talk about how one boy takes the basketball and won't give it back, and the other one pushes him, and so he hits him, and how it just spirals out of control. And the same things happen. It happens on the freeway when somebody cuts somebody off, and then he cuts him back off, and then he runs into him, and they get out and they're fighting. I mean, just stuff happens like that in real life. And so if we understand that we are responsible for our behavior, and we're not responsible for how somebody else behaves, and somebody else's behavior, whether it's your brother, whether it's your spouse, whether it's somebody at work, whether it's a perfect stranger, somebody else's behavior does not give us the right to behave poorly. So if somebody does something bad to you, it's not an excuse. It doesn't give you the right to do something bad back to them. And once we understand that concept, I think we'll all be better off.
Yeah, going back to that story with your two boys, one of the principles in your book was failure is an opportunity to coach your kids. And I think that in whatever situation occurs in your family, you can always use something, even if it's bad, and turn it into good as a teaching moment. And I also like the idea of, never use an excuse as far as your own attitude or how you're being treated. You can choose how to react to other people. It kind of reminds me of one of your other stories that you gave in your book about how two brothers came from the same broken home, but one grew up to be kind of a successful businessman, and one ended up in prison and kind of pretty unsuccessful.
Yeah. And that's so true. And I was talking to my wife the other day about there are people that we all know that they just are never happy. And it's like they're always talking about all the bad things that happen to them, whether it be work or spouse related or kid related or just, health related or whatever. And it's so easy to focus on those things, but, we have the ability to choose how we're going to react to the things that happen to us. And I love that story about the two brothers, because, they were asked about, what do they, their dad was an alcoholic. He was abusive. They got taken away, split up. And so they had a terrible childhood. And like you said, the one became very successful, and the one became just like the dad. And when they were both asked the same question, to what do you contribute your position in life? And their answer, both of them, was the same thing. With a dad like mine, what else would you expect? And so it just shows that, one of them said, I'm not going to be like that. And the other one said, well, I guess that's just the way I am. And so maybe that's a little oversimplified, but, I talk about if you go into the gym and you're lifting weights, there's always going to be somebody that's bigger and stronger than you. And there's always going to be somebody that's smaller and weaker than you. And so the point is, you can look at the guy that's bigger and stronger and go, oh man, I'm never going to be like that. Or you can say, hey, I'm better than them. I'm stronger than them. And so it's just important to understand that we get to choose how we're gonna face the obstacles, because we are guaranteed to have trouble in this world. It's just gonna happen. And so, I'm trying to teach my boys, and remind myself and my wife and I, reminding each other that as these things happen to us, we can go, oh my gosh, why is all this happening to me? Or we can go, hey, this is a challenge. We're going to band together as a team, and we're going to face it, and we're going to overcome it. And so we're going to choose to do that.
Yeah, the age-old question of, is the glass half full or half empty? It's always better to look at it as half full. And
absolutely.
And Drew, what about one piece of advice that maybe you've been given as a dad, or a piece of advice that you would like to give Father Nation today?
Well, I'll tell you, when we had our first child, my business partner, Craig Doman, had already had, I think, 2 already. And so I'll never forget, my oldest was maybe a month or 6 weeks old, and he wouldn't sleep unless he was laying on my chest or laying on my wife's chest on the couch, and we just have to lay there. And I was probably complaining to him, like, oh my gosh, I can't get any sleep. This is the only way Jake will sleep. And he goes, let me tell you something. The best advice I can give you is enjoy every phase, because it's just a phase. The good ones and the bad ones. And I found that to be such great wisdom, even as my boys are now 13 and 15 and looking to even, the future. Everything's a phase. And you know what I would give? You've got a 6-month-old. You can still do this. You got a 3-year-old. You know what I would give to have one of my kids be able to just lay on my chest and sleep? I would give anything, because it's such a sweet moment. And so, and there were things that we went through. My youngest, he had RSV, which is a very serious infection, pulmonary infection, or breathing infection. And so, we had to go through a time where we had to give him these breathing treatments, and it was not great, but it was a phase. And so, the best advice I can give any dad is just enjoy every phase, because it's just a phase.
And again, as you said earlier, time goes fast. You have to be great in the time given, no matter what phase you're in, whether you're 3 years old or 13 years old. You want to treasure that time. And again, a piece of scripture, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. I think to be a great dad, you need to treasure your kids in whatever phase they're in life. That means spending time with them, communicating with them, giving them respect, accountability. As a dad, you need to build a culture in your home, have a game plan, and lead your family. Again, Father Nation, today we've had Drew Pittman on the show, author of a book, First Team Dad, Your Playbook for a Winning Family. He's been an NFL agent for 24 years, father of 2 teenage boys. And before we leave today, Drew, would you like to give us one quote on fatherhood? And then maybe, what do you think is the most important trait a father can have?
Oh, wow. You're throwing me for a loop on a quote. I've got a ton rushing in, but, I think, what you said is really something that people can hold on to. And that is, you have to treasure the moments that you have. My wife looked at our kids the other day, and they're 13 and 15. And I am so thankful that we hadn't wasted a moment with them. We've really been very intentional about spending time with them. And so you'll never get that time back. And really what led me to write this book is that I looked up and my boys were 10 and 12, and I thought, in 6 years, my oldest was going to be gone for good. And you don't get that time. You don't get this time back. And sometimes I feel like it's easy to feel like, man, if I can just get them out of the house alive, then I'll be doing good. But treasure the time that you have. Embrace the challenges that come your way. Use them as ways to create a legacy. Because not only not only do you have a culture in your home, you are creating a legacy. And I'll tell you this really quick. My boys were really mad at me one time because I disciplined them for something. And I told them this. I said, when we brought y'all home from the hospital, we did not get an instruction manual. And we are doing the best we can. And everything that we do, we are doing because we love you. But the one thing I will guarantee you is that we will make mistakes. And so I said, just know this. I take this very seriously because I know one thing. How I parent you and how your mom and I parent you guys is going to be the biggest influence on how you parent my grandchildren. And so I take it very, very seriously, and I'm doing the best I can, and I'm doing everything I do because I love you.
Again, on the show today, we've had Drew Pittman. Go to Amazon. You can find First Team Dad, your playbook for a winning family. Again, one of the first steps you can do, dads out there, if you want to build a playbook for a winning family, rank what's important in your life. You have to first know what you value and what you want to have it as your family culture. So I would rank what's important in your life first, and then go from there. Oftentimes, it could change over time. You have to make audibles, just like in football, adjustments on the fly. But check it out, First Team Dad. You can find it on Amazon. Be sure to connect with Drew Pittman on Facebook. You can find him by searching for First Team Dad. You can also connect with Drew Pittman on Twitter at DP Football Agent. Again, at DP Football Agent on Twitter and Instagram. Today, Father Nation was brought to you in part by Al Cole from CBS Radio and his show People of Distinction. You can find Father Nation now over a giant iTunes radio network, in addition to the Live 365 network. And also run on over to fathernation.com. Check it out. We have podcasts going up quite often. And so there's many other dads in the featured dad sections that you can go back to and listen to. And I want to thank again Drew Pittman for coming on Father Nation today.
Jesse, thank you.